A publisher fired the founders of a beloved studio 3 days before a $250 million bonus was supposed to be paid out. A judge later found that the CEO used ChatGPT to help plan the firings, and the game at the center of all of it just released 3 days ago. This is the full story of what happened to the creators of Subnautica, and how a Korean gaming giant nearly got away with one of the most brazen acts of corporate theft the gaming industry has ever seen. To understand why this matters, you need to understand what Unknown Worlds actually built. The original Subnautica released into early access in 2014 and launched fully in 2018. It was an underwater survival game set on an alien ocean planet where you woke up alone after a crash landing with nothing but a small escape pod and whatever you could find on the ocean floor. No weapons, no combat focus. Just exploration, resource gathering, base building, and the creeping terror of descending into water so deep and so dark that your brain starts inventing things to be afraid of. It was unlike anything else on the market. It won awards. It sold millions of copies. It built one of the most devoted communities in gaming. The studio behind it, Unknown Worlds Entertainment, had been founded in 2001 by Charlie Cleveland and Max McGuire. The two had met in the modding community, building a Half-Life mod called Natural Selection that became so popular it eventually got a full standalone sequel. They were not a corporate studio. They were developers who genuinely loved making games, who built their company around a specific culture of creativity and player trust. When they made Subnautica, they funded part of it through early access. Players paid to support development before the game was finished and got updates as the team built it. The community responded with extraordinary loyalty because the team talked to them honestly, showed them real development progress, and delivered on what they promised. In 2021, Unknown Worlds was acquired by Krafton. If you do not recognize that name, you almost certainly recognize their most famous product, PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, better known as PUBG. Krafton is a South Korean gaming giant that went public on the Korean Stock Exchange in 2021 and has been on an acquisition spree ever since, buying up studios to expand its portfolio beyond the battle royale that made it famous. The acquisition of Unknown Worlds was announced as a partnership. Krafton would provide funding and resources. Unknown Worlds would retain creative control and continue building the games they had always built. The founders and key employees would receive a bonus structure tied to performance milestones. Specifically, a $250 million earnout payment tied to Subnautica 2 meeting certain revenue targets. That bonus structure is the center of everything that followed. Development on Subnautica 2 began in earnest after the acquisition. The team was building something more ambitious than the original, a full sequel set on a new alien ocean planet, adding 4-player co-op for the first time while keeping single-player fully supported, built on Unreal Engine 5, with new mechanics including DNA modification that let players acquire abilities from the creatures they encountered. The original had been a quiet, solitary experience. Subnautica 2 was expanding the universe while trying to preserve what made the first game special. It was a hard balance to strike, and the team was taking the time they needed to get it right. The game was originally targeted for early access in 2025. Internal playtests through the first half of that year showed the team there were areas that needed more work before they were ready to put something in front of players. According to the official statement from Unknown Worlds at the time, the decision to delay into 2026 was made purely on the basis of game quality. They wanted more time to improve what they had before launching. That explanation was entirely plausible. Unknown Worlds had always prioritized quality. Their community trusted them. The delay was disappointing but not alarming. Then on July 1, 2025, Krafton called a board meeting. In that meeting, the Krafton-controlled board voted to remove Ted Gill, the CEO of Unknown Worlds, from his position. They also removed co-founders Charlie Cleveland and Max McGuire. Three of the most important figures in the studio's history, including the two people who had founded it, were fired simultaneously. Steve Papoutsis, who had previously served as executive producer on the Callisto Protocol, a game that had launched to deeply mixed reviews, was installed as the new CEO of Unknown Worlds. The community reaction was immediate and furious. Subnautica had been built on the relationship between its developers and its players, the founders being removed and replaced by someone from outside the studio, by a publisher the community had already been watching with some suspicion, triggered a wave of concern. Players flooded social media. The Subnautica subreddit lit up. Gaming journalists started asking questions. Krafton's public statement said the founders had been removed because they had abandoned their responsibilities and caused significant development delays. Unknown Worlds disputed this entirely. And then the lawsuit began. Ted Gill filed legal action against Krafton almost immediately after his removal. The details that emerged through the legal process were extraordinary. Court documents revealed that the $250 million bonus tied to Subnautica 2's performance was contractually required to be paid regardless of whether the founders were still employed at the company, meaning firing them would not get Krafton out of paying it if the game hit its targets. However, the earnout period had a specific timeline. If the game was delayed past that window, the bonus period would expire and Krafton would be off the hook. The delay of Subnautica 2 from 2025 to 2026, the delay that had been publicly attributed to game quality concerns, was alleged in the lawsuit to have been manufactured by Krafton specifically to push the release past the earnout deadline and avoid paying the founders what they were owed. That allegation alone was damning enough. Then came the ChatGPT detail. Court documents revealed that Krafton's CEO had used ChatGPT to help plan the firings of the Unknown Worlds founders. He had reportedly used the AI to draft or refine the strategy around the leadership changes despite legal counsel warning that the $250 million payout was contractually required regardless of what happened with employment status. The CEO had been warned by lawyers that firing the founders would not get them out of paying the bonus. He proceeded anyway. He used an AI chatbot to help him do it. The gaming community responded to this detail with a level of contempt that is difficult to overstate. The idea that the developers of one of the most beloved games in the survival genre had been fired by a corporate executive who had consulted ChatGPT about how to do it became its own meme, its own shorthand for everything people distrust about large publishers acquiring independent studios. It was not just that Krafton had allegedly tried to steal $250 million from the people who had built Subnautica. It was that they had apparently been so incompetent about it that they used a chatbot to help plan it, ignored their own lawyers, and did it anyway. Meanwhile, the community was also dealing with a different concern that had emerged earlier. At some point in the lead-up to all of this, Krafton had listed Subnautica 2 in a financial report using the term game as a service, a designation that in gaming is typically associated with ongoing subscription models, battle passes, loot boxes, and the kind of aggressive monetization that is the opposite of everything the original Subnautica stood for. The community lost their minds. The original Subnautica had been a complete game purchased once for a fair price with no microtransactions, and a developer who had been transparently honest with its players through the entire development process. The idea of Subnautica 2 becoming a live service extraction machine was so antithetical to what the franchise represented that it generated a wave of panic that the remaining Unknown Worlds team had to publicly address. They released a statement confirming there would be no subscriptions, no loot boxes, no battle pass, and no microtransactions. The game as a service label, they said, referred only to the studio's intent to keep updating the game for years, the same thing they had done with the original. The community accepted the explanation with cautious relief, but the trust with Krafton specifically had been damaged. The legal proceedings moved relatively quickly. In March 2026, a judge ruled in favor of Ted Gill on the key question. The court found that Krafton had breached the equity purchase agreement by terminating the key employees without valid cause and by improperly seizing operational control of Unknown Worlds. The board decision from July 1st was declared ineffective. Ted Gill was reinstated as CEO of Unknown Worlds. The $250 million earnout period was reintroduced with a new deadline of September 15, 2026, with an option to extend to March 2027. Krafton had tried to push the founders out, run down the clock on their bonus, and hand the studio to someone else. A judge told them they could not do that and put everything back the way it was supposed to be. The reinstated leadership then faced an immediate new dispute. Krafton, despite having just been ordered by a court to restore Gill's authority, announced the early access release date for Subnautica 2 without consulting him. Gill found out about the May 14th date through the public announcement along with everyone else. He was not happy. The relationship between the founder and the publisher that had tried to fire him was, predictably, still difficult even after the court victory. But Subnautica 2 released anyway. On May 14, 2026, 3 days ago, the game entered early access on PC and Xbox. It is available on Xbox Game Pass from day one. It costs $29.99. It includes 4-player co-op, new biomes, new creatures, DNA modification mechanics, and a new alien ocean planet to explore. Players who buy before May 25th receive a Reaper Leviathan base decoration, a nod to one of the most iconic and terrifying creatures from the original game. The full one release is expected sometime in 2027, with all early access updates included at no additional cost. The community response to the actual game has been largely positive. Players who had spent a year watching their favorite studio get dragged through a corporate nightmare showed up on day one and found something that felt like Subnautica. The darkness, the depth, the wonder of discovering something extraordinary hundreds of meters below the surface of an alien ocean. The development team, who had weathered one of the most publicly humiliating years any studio had faced in recent memory, had kept building through all of it and released something people wanted to play. Here is what makes this story significant beyond the drama of one studio and one lawsuit. Krafton is not a small company. PUBG is one of the best-selling games in history. Krafton has the resources, the legal team, and the corporate infrastructure to have done this properly and quietly if they had wanted to. Instead, they fired founders 3 days before a bonus window, used ChatGPT to help plan it, ignored their own legal counsel, told a court they had valid cause when the court found they did not, and announced a release date to their own reinstated CEO through a press release. The gaming industry has a long and painful history of publishers acquiring beloved independent studios and slowly destroying what made them special. Sometimes it happens through budget cuts, sometimes through mismanagement, sometimes through forcing studios to abandon the games their community loved in favor of whatever genre is generating the most revenue this quarter. What happened with Unknown Worlds and Krafton is something more direct than any of those. It was an alleged attempt to simply take the money and remove the people owed it before they could collect. A judge stopped it. The founders are back. The game is out. And somewhere inside Krafton, someone is going to have to figure out how to work with the people they tried to rob, for however long it takes to get Subnautica 2 to its one release and trigger the $250 million bonus that started all of this.